Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and welcome back to Goosejunkies, episode 35. It's been so long, but we are so glad to be back. Listen, we had a hiatus and a snafu trying to figure out video software for you guys, and we finally found our home here on StreamYard. At least for the time being, as long as they allow us to continue with the package we got going, we're all set. So, we appreciate y'all's patience. We're glad to be back, and we have a bunch of ideas still on the table, and we have all the time in the world to talk about it now, since a couple of us are, in the summertime, in between semesters, and a couple of us just recently graduated college. Congratulations, Horlander, on that. But we're here as I guess, a coming back episode, so to speak, trying to do something different. We haven't done this before on Goose Junkies. Normally, we just face off one thing from kids horror against something similar, but here we're actually going to be kind of doing a group discussion, more so, or I guess review, of a film that we all passionately love. I think we've all talked about this film ad nauseum at this point in Discord about how much we love it. And the film that we're going to be discussing for this podcast episode for you all is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. As usual, I'm always joined by these two great individuals, Micah Lilliquist and Shiv Patel, aka the Horrorlander, aka Ultimate Goosebumps Man. How are you two doing tonight?
Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night. It's the return of the GOATs, specifically with your boy, the baby mama bandit from the Wild West. Good to see all of y'all. Listen, man, this is a monumental episode topic because for those of you who don't know, I made a video before, or I've talked about it, is that my initiation into the horror genre was done through Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Urban legends I was into as a kid, and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was one of the first books I read as a kid. You know, it was wintertime. I used to be home alone before my mom came, and I decided to read these books with a night lamp on, the rest of the lights off in my house, and it scared the bejesus out of me. So, that immediately got me hooked into horror, kids' horror, and everything. And this movie is a fantastic adaptation, fantastic film. So I'm very excited to talk about it, as I know the guys are.
Well, we're great to have you, and I'm just as excited to talk about this film with you guys as you are. And I'm assuming Micah as well. How are you doing tonight?
Doing great. Super hyped about this topic. This is a topic I've been wanting to do for so long. So the fact that we're finally getting to this one is like a big milestone of this podcast for me. And yeah, I love this series, as you guys have mentioned. Same with you. I read this, discovered it back in elementary school. My best friend at the time, first, is the one who showed me these books. And I remember the illustrations just, traumatized me. And I remember even one time, like one of my most vivid memories was I think it was in during like silent reading time in one of my classes back in like first or second grade. And I picked up one of the books and it was the first book, and I was just flipping through it casually and got jump scared by the haunted house illustration. And like that one's always engraved itself in my brain. Obviously, Pale Lady to some extent. And I'm going to probably share a personal story about that later on. But yeah, this series is very special to me, especially nowadays, more as a horror fan, a kid's horror fan, as one of those first things along with Goosebumps that got me into it. And like, I was already hyped for the movie. I had no idea this movie at first was announced. And the first time I found out about it was when those Super Bowl TV spots that first dropped that were kind of the first public look at the movie. And that was like, this sold me on the hype train. And yeah, I've loved this movie ever since.
I'm glad that you have the rich backstory with this franchise as you do, Micah. I remember seeing the trailers for this movie when it first dropped, and I'm going to be honest, at the time, I was not really interested in a lot of horror coming out around, I think, when this movie came out, was it
2019.
2018? 2019?
19.
20, around this time, yeah. Right before COVID. And I decided not to go see it in theaters. And I immediately regretted it because the first time I watched this movie was during COVID. And I told Micah this in a previous story in our collab talking about the movie. It was around July in 2020, the heart of COVID. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to binge horror movies until Halloween, all the way from like, I think it was July 1st all the way through October 31st. Every day I watched a horror movie or two. And I caught a lot of movies I never saw before. And one of the earliest ones during that binge I finally got to see was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And I was blown away by this movie because I think right before this, I actually watched Goosebumps 2015 for like the second time. And then I watched this and I'm like, holy crap, this is like the best version of Goosebumps 2015 possible out there. And every time I've seen this movie, I like it more and more and more and more and more. I've seen this movie maybe like 4 times now. It's incredible. It's an absolutely fantastic movie, and it's a shame I never got to see it in theaters. I'm kind of envious to Micah there for that. I don't know if you saw it in theaters, BD, but this would have been a fantastic film to do so. Um, I have a lot to unpack with this movie, and I'm sure you guys do too. So I guess I'll pass it off because we have to talk about the film. We got to start somewhere. Whoever wants to take it, why don't we just get into what Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark the movie is about?
There's only one man for the job, and I gotta give it to Micah. This man is
Okay,
a
Micah.
registered scary
All right, you're up
story.
again.
Go ahead, Micah.
All right, so the plot of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark focuses on this group of kids who are these friends set in who live in this small town called Mill Valley in Pennsylvania, and it's set in the late 1960s around Halloween time. And the main character is this girl named Stella. She's a very talented writer. She's a big horror writer, and she has some kind of lingering trauma because her mother left when she was very young, and so she's pretty much been living with her dad most of the time, taking care of him more than he takes care of her, it seems like. And they seem to have a very close bond with each other. You can tell from like their interactions, they're very close and care about each other deeply. And she has these two friends, Chuck and Augie, and basically on Halloween night, they go to basically prank this bully named Tommy, who is this absolute jock douchebag character who is pretty much been tormenting them since they were kids. And they finally get this revenge prank on him, and he gets pretty much ticked off at them and chases them down to a local drive-in theater where they meet this drifter named Ramon, who is this very mysterious dude. He very quickly just kind of accepts these three as their friends, but they pretty much break into his car while he's just watching the movie to hide out from Tommy. And he even defends them against Tommy and kind of stands up to Tommy. And they kind of form a very fast friendship. And basically, Stella decides to take them to show this haunted house that's kind of a local urban legend in their neighborhood, surrounding a girl named Sarah Bellows, who was maybe accused of being a witch when she was alive. There's urban legends of her telling stories to kids through the walls of her basement where she lived. And then those kids never made it home and mysteriously died in some way. And so they go into this house to explore. And while they're in there, first of all, Chuck has a very weird and freaky encounter where he's like pranking Augie, trying to scare him, and hides in this cupboard upstairs. And all of a sudden, he peeks out, and the room is suddenly brand new again, as if it was back in whenever era the Bellows' family lived in. And there's this like really scary old lady with like a black funeral shroud with this Doberman. And he like freaks out and doesn't know what's happening, so he like hides back in. And then when he comes back out again after Augie finds him, the house is back to being decrepit. No explanation, doesn't realize he gets really freaked out and just wants to get out of there. Meanwhile, Stella, down in the basement where Sarah Bellows lived, she finds Sarah's book of scary stories. And basically unleashes the spirit of Sarah Bellows. And after they escape the house, she ends up stealing the book basically and taking it with her. And the whole plot kicks off with her discovering that these stories are suddenly appearing in the books that were never there before, written in red blood-like ink. And each story highlights the name of a specific person who was in the house at the time. And she soon discovers that the people listening to the stories begin to mysteriously disappear, and their disappearances may be linked to these stories. And the whole movie is them trying to figure out what happened to Sarah Bellows and to find a way they can stop this before the story reclaims them next. So that's basic story.
Okay. So, going from that, wherever, I guess we'll pass it over to BD first. What is your immediate reaction to Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? I know you've probably seen this movie a couple of times in your life up to this point. How do you feel about it now, like looking back on it?
So I think the first time I actually had seen this movie, funny enough, was a couple of years ago. It was very recent, and the main reason for that was because I was very used to the original stories. I like you, and I didn't really think much about the movie. I was more so just like, okay, I saw the advertisements on them adapting this movie. I thought they were gonna butcher it. I watched it. I was wrong. I have to say that this movie is fantastic. I love it. It was brought up many times in conversations that this movie feels like Goosebumps 2015 done perfectly. I almost think that it's what 2015's Goosebumps should have taken. I love the fact that the movie honors the stories and honors the time period. It takes place in the 1960s, which basically takes away any modernization, kind of taking you out of the story, eliminating some of the threats. There is the lack of technology, the lack of resources, which makes the urban legends and scary factors of the stories enhanced. The characters are very strong. They actually feel like a genuine friend group. And I feel like this has been said before as like an analogy, but this is one of the most famous coming of age stories. It feels like the kids from It. It feels like a genuine friend group of these sort of underdog kids coming of age, coming together, grouping together, and working together towards a task. Stella is a great main character. She's very intelligent. She's very genuine. At the same time, she's very vulnerable, and you see how she kind of works around the vulnerabilities of her life. And Ramon is this drifter who you see get racially discriminated against. He's pretty much always behind the scenes. And now he's getting into the limelight and potentially finding new friends, a new sort of love interest hinted with Stella. So it's a good set of main characters. And the stories themselves, this movie on a majority, for my opinion, before we dive too much, I guess, in depth, I think that the movie took a lot of the stories and made them better. It enhanced them, it integrated them well into the story. Sarah Bellows is a new character. There's no real story of her from any of the books. So the fact that she's being used as this medium for the stories actually being fleshed out, that she's tortured, she's been discriminated against, she's also the underdog. So, in a sense, the villain has a parallel to the main characters because the main characters are all the underdogs. And, Sarah Bellows is the biggest underdog. She got a ton of torment and torture in her life, and she finally gets that power to, take revenge unintentionally. The way that the stories are written and they manifest in the real world is scary because it's almost like Russian roulette. It's like a loose trigger. You don't know when a story is going to pop off and start manifesting and who it's going to target. So there's that imminent threat always throughout the movie. Harold's whole body horror scene with the person being turned into straw, and especially Tommy the bully getting what's coming to him being stabbed with a pitchfork and then leaking out straw is horrific. The Pale Lady is very much enhanced from her story. She has a very creepy lead up scene involving a red hallway inside of a hospital. She does something to a character that's quite horrific. And, a lot of the other stories, like A Big Toe and even Jangly Man being a combination of two stories, they managed to make great villains, great monsters, great characters. They have practical effects mixed with good CGI, so you don't feel taken out of the movie. You can kind of stick on track with it. And I feel like overall they did a great job. And I love the fact, especially towards the end, that the stakes are there. It's not kumbaya, it's not the end. There's still a lot that has to be done. There are lives that have been taken, there's loss that's been dealt, and that really enhances the stakes of the movie. So I used to give it like a 9.5 out of 10, 9.8, but I think it's a perfect movie now. After seeing it a bunch, I'm like, they did the best job they could. They did a fantastic job. And honestly, as much as I'd like to see a sequel, I feel like they're going to have to take a lot to top this one because they just hit it out of the park. So those are my general thoughts.
Yeah, great points there, man. I guess I'll get into my nitty gritty here about how I feel about the film. Like I said, like when I first watched the movie, I was probably in the same ballpark as you. Like I'm like, there's some slower parts in like the first 30 minutes. It does kind of take its sweet time with the expository information that we need to know before we get into the rigmarole of the rest of the film. Because this film's runtime is pretty thick. I mean, it's let's see here. It's 108 minutes, so it's over an hour and a half. So it does take quite a little bit of time out of your day to watch it. It's not like a 2 hour film or anything. It doesn't need to be that. But when I first watched it, I'm like, it is kind of slow. But over time, as I know the movie and as I watch the film more and more, I get to, when I come back to these characters and get to reacquaint myself with them, I don't mind spending more time with them before the chaos starts. Because I'm like, this is probably the more innocent, wholesome part of the film, where you have literally a slice of life in 1968, rural town, Pennsylvania, on Halloween. Let me tell you, this has to be top five best atmospheric movies ever set on Halloween, in my opinion. It's up there with Dark Harvest. It's up there with, I don't know, Halloween Town. It's up there with the John Carpenter's Halloween, Season of the Witch, whatever. This is fantastic. How period accurate they're able to make this movie. I don't think this movie would be the same if they couldn't pull it off the way they did. But they managed to do it. I mean, you got drive-ins, you got old cars, like Micah said in our collab, that really do help accentuate the movie as well. A period of the time, clothing, how people are treated, such as minorities like Ramon. It's almost a period piece, and when it comes to that, and it does dabble into realism and developing these characters in a real way. They come from a town that has prejudice. They come from a town that obviously is rooted in fear. Obviously, is looking for scapegoats historically to put all the blame on, and you see that kind of unfold in the movie with this motley crew of misfits and horror geeks and outcasts in the society that they're in, who are prone to being bullied, ostracized for being different or whatnot, or thrown into a situation as a group and have to be the heroes because for some reason, I guess the power of Halloween or maybe the curse of Sarah Bellows that she's inflicted onto her book of scary stories is now going to be affecting who knows that it decides to target. What I think this movie does very well, I mentioned this in the collab as well with Micah, is that the characters are fantastic. The acting performances from everybody in here is fantastic. There's not a dull moment to be had in this movie in regards to them. And this even involves the cold open. I've said it before in the past about certain films, like, you know, in order to get your audience hooked, you need to like start off with either showing the scope of the story and what we're about to get into, and often than not, movies attempt it but can't quite pull that off, or you just need to hit the ground running with some action and get you right pulled into what's going on in the thick of it. This movie does the former, but it literally shows you the entire landscape, what you're about to get into, and it's so beautiful. And the song "Season of the Witch" is like playing for like I feel like 10 minutes. It probably isn't that long, but it feels like 10 minutes of the movie. Where the "Season of the Witch," that song is so catchy, and we follow many different characters where they're at in the town, and you get a sense of their personalities within the first few seconds of knowing them. How many films can you say that are able to accomplish that in a cold open without with minimal dialogue, with minimal anything? This film is able just to introduce these characters. You know how they are off the bat, and you can immediately roll with it. That's impressive. And the film looks beautiful. Aside from the atmosphere, I mean, it's well shot too. This goes down to the practical effects, the CGI enhancements. You want to think that CGI enhancements is a good thing in modern movies, but for this movie, it is a good thing because it's, I would say, about 70% practical, 30% CGI. But the CGI enhancements don't take away from the practical effects being had, which is a talent in of its own too. The music is really good. Micah brought up a good point. I'll let him share it. Something I never noticed before, but it's brilliant. He'll probably share when he talks about his thoughts. But brilliant stuff. And then the through line story. This is where it matters the most in this movie. I feel the through line story is super engaging, and the best thing about it is that it incorporates adaptations of stories that are very beloved in the series and does so in a way that doesn't take away from the through line. It's all well incorporated. It doesn't feel like a random tangent like a Goosebumps 2015. Oh, we're in a grocery store. There's the werewolf of Fever Swamp. It's not random like that. There's causation. The film goes out of its way to establish rules, what's going on, and it's easy to follow in that regard. And you know when a character's name comes down in the book that they're next and they're about to be screwed once you see the villain or whatever being sprawled out on the page. Like, oh, you see the toe, big toe. Oh crap! You already, if you know the story from the books, then it gets you excited, right? That's what it's supposed to do. Brilliant stuff, and the action sequences are good. There's flashback scenes in here, kind of, that are very good as well. Um, I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's one of those movies that have the production synergy on top of the writing synergy, and when you put the presentation together with a talented director like Andre Overdahl, the legendary guy who's made Last Voyage of the Demeter and Autopsy of Jane Doe, two fantastic horror movies out there in the subgenre. I would say that this is his magnum opus. Like, this is easily the top of those three, but damn if I'd be lying to you that all three aren't close. Maybe some might be a mildly more flawed than the other, but this one is just brilliant. It's a brilliant film. I don't know if Guillermo del Toro being the producer might have helped or what have you. But honestly, if we're talking Guillermo del Toro films, this is his best one too. Just saying. Just saying. Okay. But yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to keep the conversation going longer, so I'm gonna pass it over to Micah. And Micah, I know how much you love this movie, so spill your heart out. Let us hear what you have to say about it.
So yeah, this is one of those like really special movie theater experiences for me because it was like the first time I ever went to the theater with like just a group of friends, because it was just like me, a couple of like three other friends who all grew up reading the Scary Stories books, and we all loved them. So going to see this movie together was just a blast. There's so many sequences in there that, like, when you're first time viewing it in the theater, there are genuinely effective scares in this movie, even when you're watching it at home. But in the theater, I think it just like ramped up the scares by tenfold because it's the first time viewing it. You don't know what you're gonna see, and there's so many sequences in here which we'll get more in depth in once we start talking about the individual adaptations a bit more. But there are sequences in there that really do a great job at crafting suspense and tension and just like make you know something bad is going to happen, but you don't know when. And that's just one of the biggest strengths in the horror sequences. There's some very effective body horror, some great music. And that's the one thing Completionist alluded to, is that the music is tailor-made, specifically in the adaptation sequences. I read an interview with Marco Beltrami and Anna Drubik, who did the music for this, and they basically said that they wanted to give each monster their own instrumental motif. So Harold uses a lot of guitars and banjos to kind of fit that kind of backwoods farmhouse kind of feel. The Big Toe is a lot of very bombastic brass music. The Red Spot uses a lot of string instruments to kind of, obviously highlight the idea of spiders crawling and things like that. The Pale Lady uses a lot of woodwind instruments, and then Jangly Man had a heavy focus on percussion. So I really like that as well. Kind of giving each monster its own musical theme, an idea to really help accentuate the threat level, accentuate kind of the horror. It gives you a sense of what this creature or sequence is going to entail in terms of the threat level of the monster. And that's all really well done. I think that, again, the practical and CGI blend is flawless. As some movies do a very poor job of it, this is an example where it does it really well, where it does things like gives Harold a massive hole in his stomach, which I think is honestly an improved design over the original Stephen Gamble drawing with the belly, which I know is iconic, and I feel like that'd be sacrilege to some people saying it, but I think I like Harold with the stomach hole better. I think it makes him feel more like a living scarecrow, because when you see behind the scenes where he actually did have the stomach is part of the design, like where it's much more faithful to Gamel's drawing, it kind of just feels like a guy in a costume. But when you see it in the movie where it's, again, this giant hole in the stomach, there's just like a straight up wooden planks for one of the arms, it really feels like a living sentient scarecrow. And like things like, again, Pale Lady using the CGI to pretty much animate her face a bit more just helps give her a bit more expressiveness, a bit more, while still making her very morose and very, still very monotone in her expressions, but it's just slight little things like her blinking or smiling a little bit wider or something like that just helps make her feel a bit more creepy in that way. Is like she's almost getting this sixth sense of joy out of tormenting Chuck in that sequence. And there's just so many other examples. Or you obviously Jangly Man is the most CGI heavy character, but even then they still did stuff practically with an actual contortionist on set to really help sell the Jangly Man's physical, build. And everything is so well done. Again, as I mentioned, the setting of the 1960s aesthetic is pretty much perfect. I love a good period piece in movies, especially if it's done really well. And they just knocked it out of the park here. I think that, again, as you mentioned, the opening sequence of this movie is great. Even setting up Tommy and Harold, being Harold the first creature you even see, who isn't like a manifestation of the stories like all the other monsters are. Harold was just an established scarecrow on Tommy's farm that Tommy just hated and beat up. And it was just the story that brought him to life. Which I think is a really cool way of doing it. And obviously showing us Harold right off the bat, bringing that iconic character that everyone pretty much loves to the forefront, and getting to see him right away at the beginning of the movie really helps set the tone. And seeing Tommy, again, beat Harold, something that's very reminiscent of the original story, which we'll get to. But it all kind of helps just set the tone. You realize what's going to happen, and just everything is so well done. There's a lot of great lighting. I love the way the horror sequences are lit. There's a lot of unique color sequences and stuff. There's like heavy teals or heavy reds in some scenes, and a lot of that was done practically, which I just got to appreciate. And so, yeah, I've said my piece on this before, but yeah, I love this movie and everything that went into it.
I think building also off like some things you guys said, I think like that detail you brought up about each monster having its own like, unique OST and song. That's really cool because again, I think one of the big positives about the movie is the threat level involving each of the villains is done so well. And Sarah Bellows, you know, I use 2015 Goosebumps as a comparison because it came out a few years before in similar formula. But in that movie, like Comp brought up, it feels like a lot of the time you're thrown into situations that are already kind of happening and they just sort of have to make it fit into the plot. Here it felt like Sarah Bellows was this almost omnipresent figure that was paying attention to each of the characters, and any juncture point, any vulnerable point that the character is about to get into, she right away triggers the story. So in a way, growing up, I used to watch like a lot of different cartoons and animes and shows. There's always that one episode they do where the villain is hunting down characters one by one. Here in the movie, Sarah Bellows is basically almost in a way hunting down each character and finding that weak point and then unleashing a monster. And us, as Scary Stories fans, like Micah and I we knew the stories. So when you see what the monster is going to be, you're like, oh shoot, not that one. Like that is, you get this feel of dread where you're like, oh shit, the big toe, oh shit, the red spot. You really feel bad for the characters, and it's almost like hopelessness because you know that they're not going to come out of it in a good way. And really, only until the end, any of them really manage to triumph. Mostly throughout the movie, they're all getting targeted one by one, and it is horrific, but it's effective.
Mm-hmm. And I like how Micah brought up how well the movie does suspense. I'm not easy to get jump scared, and normally I get annoyed by it. But I would say about 3 times in this movie, there's legitimate jump scares for me. Obviously, the when you first meet the big toe character under the bed, that jump scared me. Pale ladies jump scared me, and even Sarah Bellows jump scared me near the back portion of the movie. And like I'm sure we're going to talk about specific scenes in more detail soon, but um, there's 2 scenes that stick out to me. Like obviously these are like the must watch scenes of the whole movie. Obviously, it's Tommy and Harold's interaction out there in the field. That is brilliant. Probably like the most nightmare fuel thing for me personally that comes from this film. Next to the whole scene with the guy who's being targeted by the big toe after he eats the stew with the toe in it, and he's like, "Where's my toe?" or something like that. That shit is creepy as hell, and you know that scene is building up to him about to be screwed. Like it kind of feels like this is like a supernatural slasher, but not a slasher because it's PG-13. You can't go too far with it, but I think that's the brilliance of this movie at times. Like the scene with like Tommy, we see enough, of what's going on with his body that we don't need to go overboard with it. Because if they went overboard with it, it might be rated R. But that's like the perfect balance for PG-13, right? And I think that that's what this film should have been always is PG-13 because this was a series made for kids, and this is a kids horror movie. So them like kind of stopping the transformation into a scarecrow, right? Where they did was perfect. They didn't have to go too far. The jump scare where you know that the big toe guy is about to kill this kid. We don't need to see him being dragged into the dark and being murdered, right? Some people, if you're asking for that out there, you might be a little edgy. But for a PG-13 movie, I mean, like I'm at a hard confidence to say that this is the best PG-13 horror movie ever made. When it comes to that, I mean, it's just masterfully woven. It's not easy to pull off a PG-13 horror movie. Let's be frank. There's a slew of them out there. I can name off a lot. Like Stay Alive, it kind of has a similar formula here with the main character of that movie. Kind of feels like a Sarah Bellows archetype. Or you have countless PG-13 horror films.
Zombie Town.
Imaginary, Megan, whatever. You have similar vibes with like a character hunting down side characters, periphery characters, main characters. But this movie, for some reason, just has more going for it than the average. And I think a lot of it has to deal with the talent behind the movie, for one. But I also think that the monsters and a lot of it has to deal with the monsters. And I think we're all three creature heads. When we say like we love creatures, we love monsters. This is more up our alley. But when I think of horror, especially like anthology horror, even something like based on urban legends like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, obviously you're coming here for the monsters, right? Right. So it nails that. And Sarah Bellows being the uber villain, being like this empathetic villain. We've seen this in modern Hollywood. All these movies want to try to make us feel bad for the villain who does these horrible things. This film's no different, but the writing is there to make us care. It makes sense for us to make that conclusion why we care. It's not. I mean, it is kind of forced down our throats just a little bit because you do have to put the disbelief about how evil this woman actually is in the afterlife. But putting that aside, knowing her backstory and getting that in the depth that we do, in the way that we do, and it shows us. It doesn't tell us what happened to her. It actually shows us what happened to her. That's important. And that's just another thing that this film knows perfectly what it's doing on. So yeah, the monsters, the makeup team deserved an Oscar for this movie. If they didn't win one, I'd be ashamed because they look fantastic. Harold might be like an unofficial horror icon. It just hasn't happened yet. Give this film about 10 years, you're gonna start seeing Harold animatronics at Spirit Halloween. There's gonna be Harold animatronics. Cult classic written all over it when it comes to that stuff. And I did see a Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark shirt at TJ Maxx once, and I bought it. I wish there was more merch because I would buy the hell out of it because these monsters are incredible. And I guess we've gushed about that long enough. So I'll pass it over to the next person who wants to take the next portion over and talk about, I guess, the stories themselves and get into the nitty gritty.
Mike, you want to go or you want me to go?
I think I can start with Harold. How about this? You can do the short story. I'll do the movie.
Sure.
So you can start with the short story since we're kind of comparing them.
Yeah, so Harold is one of my favorite shorts. It's in my top 3 favorite short stories from the collection, outside of Something Fell from Aloft in the Window. The Harold short story is basically about these 2 farmers who are, in their farmland, and they're kind of little shits. They have pretty much bored all the time. They got really nothing to do outside of herding their cows. So they end up creating this kind of scarecrow dummy that they plan on using to scare away the birds. But what they end up doing is they end up making it look like their neighbor Harold, who they spite. They don't like him, so they make it. And what they do each day is they kind of leave it around the dining area when they're eating, and they sort of throw food at it. They'll beat it up when they're angry. They take their frustration out on it. And eventually one day when they're messing with this doll, they hear a grunt. They hear a noise come out of it. And right away they look at each other and they're like, I know you heard it grunt, right? And they're like, yeah, I heard it. And eventually, as the days go on, they keep hearing sounds and they start chalking it up to, okay, maybe a mouse got inside of Harold. Maybe there's something in there, insects or whatever, that's causing it to, slightly spasm or make noise. But then eventually one day, Harold gets up and starts walking around, gets on top of the roof and starts trotting on all fours like a horse, gets out to the farmland and basically walks out there. So they're getting very, very paranoid about it. And eventually, one day, when they have to go milk the cows and go out to the milking area, they forget the milking stools. And it's going to cost quite a bit to go and replace them. So they go end up getting them. And the guy who has to end up getting it does not come back. And when the other farmer gets back to go check on him, let's just say it is one of the darkest endings to any kid's horror story out there, since Harold is a kid's horror story. It is absolutely brutal, absolutely gory. I'm not shocked that it did not make it into the movie, although I know with the conversation with Micah, it almost did. It's fantastic. And honestly, that huge punchline ending to that story makes it one of my favorites. But Harold has always been a really creepy one. The fact that you got this creepy ass scarecrow that you keep inside your house starts slowly, slowly animating, becoming bigger in size, growing, moving around, acting strange. And I think that's also effective about Harold. The way the Harold Scarecrow acts is not like your typical, living dummy story. No, he's very weird. He moves weird. He acts weird. He's very unhinged feeling. And when you eventually get that big finale, it's the nice cherry on the top, for his unhinged behavior. So, yeah, I love that short story. I actually prefer it to the movie, in my opinion. But the movie, I think, is still good. And Michael will talk about why the movie segment still rocks.
Okay. So the movie version of Harold, as I mentioned earlier, we are established. Harold is established in the opening sequence of this film. We see it's also our introduction to Tommy, where basically we see it's basically the shot of Harold sitting on the cornfield, and we just see Tommy and a few of his jock friends lobbing beer bottles at his head, smashing him over. And then and Tommy grabs this iconic shot from the trailer where Tommy grabs a baseball bat and just smacks Harold over the head with it. And he does this. It's kind of implied he does this on a daily routine because it's pretty much implied that he hates this thing. And this movie tie-in book that I have here that kind of gives short story adaptations of the sequences in the movie kind of gives a little bit more depth on it, how Tommy's mom made the scarecrow, and he kind of just always hated it just because it looked ugly, it looked freaky, and it's kind of implied and mentioned in the story specifically. It doesn't really come across in the movie, but that Tommy is secretly afraid of Harold because of his appearance and because of everything that happens with it. And on Halloween night, after he goes and locks Stella and her friends all down in the Bellows house, he ends up vandalizing Ramon's car and leaving. And after Stella Bellows' ghost ends up letting Stella and her friends go, Stella goes home and starts flipping through the book and suddenly sees a new story appear, which is Harold, and she sees Tommy's name, and she's kind of weirded out. She doesn't really understand what's going on there. But then we cut back over to Tommy's house. He's arriving back home, drunk off his butt, and he is scolded by his mom. But just tells him, like, go, you forgot to take the eggs to the neighbors like you promised to do. So go do it right now. I don't care if it's nighttime, you're doing it. And so he kind of begrudgingly goes, and we get this really cool shot of him going to the barn to get the eggs. And you just see the shadow of Sarah Bellows' ghost like looming over the barn. And you just know that something bad's about to happen with him. And he basically gets the eggs and he starts walking to the cornfield. And he passes by Harold and does his usual little thing. He insults Harold, beats him a little bit as he's passing by. And as he's walking, he's obviously walking very staggered because he's drunk. And after a while, he suddenly passes by Harold again. And he kind of like stops and is like, whoa, what the heck? And he's freaked out for a second. But then decides, so he kind of writes it off. He probably just thinking, hey, I'm drunk. I probably just got turned around somewhere, and just keeps going. And then he passes by Harold's post a third time, except Harold's not there anymore. It's just the pole. And that's just this kind of like, oh crap moment with Tommy, where he just stands there for a moment, frozen in fear. And like he just starts looking around. You hear like rustling in the corn around him. There's a really great little suspenseful sequence as he's like starting to walk a little faster through the corn, looking around him really paranoid. You get this like really quick shot of like the corn rustling. You see a very brief shot of Harold figure like walking through the corn. And then he suddenly turns around. This is like the first kind of big jump scare where Harold has just suddenly appeared in front of him. And he stumbles backwards, just, scared out of his mind. And suddenly you see just like, it's just silence for a few moments. And suddenly you just see Harold's neck, his head suddenly just like creak to the side. Then his arm like springs to life at the elbow joint. His hand opens up and then he just takes a step forward. And, Tommy obviously freaks out, stumbles up and starts like running as Harold very slowly begins to move towards him. It starts with like just a couple little sporadic steps. And then slowly he gets faster and faster as he's chasing Tommy down. And eventually Tommy ends up doing the kind of typical horror movie trope where he trips over a pitchfork that was conveniently laid in the middle of the path of the cornfield he was on. And for some reason, instead of just getting up and keeping on running, he decides, I'm going to stab this inanimate scarecrow with the pitchfork. Very dumb little decision there, but this book actually does give a little more context where Tommy's kind of a psychopath in the short story, where it pretty much explains that he uses the pitchfork to stab them because he thinks it's Augie dressed as Harold. So he ends up stabbing Harold, and obviously, like, nothing happens. Harold grabs the pitchfork, pulls it out, and as Tommy's about to run away, he gets stabbed with the pitchfork, which is that was shocking when I saw that in the theater. I'm like, I'm surprised they got away with showing him being stabbed, like, because you see the impalement happen on the stomach. But then Harold ends up pulling the pitchfork out, and there's just like this weird moment of what's going to happen. And instead of blood, you just get this shot of hay sprouting from the puncture wounds. And you just hear Tommy start to gasp and wheeze, and you don't really know what's going on. He stumbles out of the cornfield and starts basically retching and vomiting, basically. But instead of vomit, you see hay start coming out of his mouth. And obviously he's freaking out. He's calling to his mom, screaming for help. And then you just get all these shots of him vomiting up hay. You got hay growing out of his hands and his ears. His skin starts becoming like this leathery burlap texture. And it's just unsettling to see. It's probably the most horrific sequence in the movie, I feel like. And then Stella and Ramon end up going back the next day to Tommy's farm because of reading the story, and Stella's kind of freaked out after Tommy goes missing. And they see a scarecrow that looks exactly like Harold in the cornfield, but it's wearing Tommy's clothing. So it's implied this is Tommy. And that's the one nitpick I will say about it that does bring it down is I kind of wish they made the scarecrow actually look like Tommy instead of just making it Harold wearing Tommy's clothes. But that's minor nitpicks. I still think it's a phenomenal sequence. I personally kind of like it better. There's some aspects I like better, some aspects I don't. I think the body horror is really well done. And I do really wish they did keep the ending of the short story, and they actually did in some old concept art, which I can actually show from the book. You actually get a concept art there of Tommy's skin sitting on the roof of the barn. So they actually did shoot the scene as well, but then ended up cutting it and changing it to what they got in the movie. So yeah, I love the sequence. It's a great sequence. It's a great way to really kick off what we're going to expect throughout the rest of this movie in terms of the adaptations.
Yeah, this was one that, at least, comparing the two, I think the movies take on it as interesting. I can kind of see, since you showed the concept art there for the supposed ending they wanted to roll with, I'm assuming they cut it out for probably MPAA rating reasons, to keep that PG-13. But comparing what happened in the movie to the short story, I'll speak on this real quick. I think the Harold story in the movie still kind of keeps the heartbeat of the short story, kind of, where it's an allegory about abuse. You still see like Tommy taking the place of the two gentlemen in the short story, constantly beating on it, using it as a punching bag, taking his frustrations out on it. And maybe Harold, I guess, takes all that energy that's being taken and enacted onto his body and maybe manifests it into, I don't know, some sort of spiritual energy to animate himself, become the manifestation of anger and abuse and guilt and whatnot. And he kind of becomes the judger of, I guess, who gets to lash out and who doesn't. Maybe that's the place of mind of Tommy. This is one of the segments of the movie that kind of makes me think When I watch it, I'm like, what were the writers trying to get across with this? Because I feel like they're trying to say something with it. What I took from it was that Tommy, because of his motivation, might be there in the wrong place. That's why Harold is like, all right, well, I guess you die now. like if it's one thing if you're just like an angst-filled teen, but once you go over that boundary and once you start to become violent and want to hurt people, or you think you're physically actually are hurting people, maybe Harold's like, well, because you think you're killing somebody, that's good enough for you to die. um, so yeah, it makes you think in that regard. Now for me, I also prefer the short story. I think the short story, I think hammers that message home a bit better. You still have the same similar idea, but there, it kind of feels like more of like you're a product of your environment, similar to something like Rob Zombie's Halloween or something. There's other stories out there like it, where you see the birth of a killer in an environment that they were unjustly put into. And it also kind of makes you think about parenting and being responsible for the creation of life, right? They don't think that Harold is living, but Harold is living. It's a living thing. It can feel, it has some sort of range of emotion because it decided to kill one of the farmers. um, Unless it's some motiveless killing machine. That's honestly probably what makes it more scary than most of the stories that you'll find in the series, is that Harold, all of his motives are implied or implications at best. They're not really outright stated. But the sheer fact that something that you thought wasn't alive, or something that you thought couldn't possibly feel, ends up being your downfall and getting you killed is scary. It makes you think about like how you should treat people or just treat anything in general, right? It has that message going for it. I think Harold's a fantastic story. I would love to see Harold, I guess, reimagined in other series, maybe other series. If they want to tackle a Scarecrow story, they should take what Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is doing with Harold and just expand on it into its like own like 30-minute segment, or something like that. I really loved the short story. Like when we're talking like points differences, though, it's like maybe like point 0.5 off from each other. They're both really solid, um, but that's just where I'm at with it.
For sure. All right, so that means we got to move on to the next one, which is Big Toe. Which would you got? Would either you guys like to cover that one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess Big Toe, the short story. I mean, I guess we could just do it side by side. The short story is very much short. It's mostly just kind of like a warning tale. It's a kid who literally gets a toe from outside, implied to be from a graveyard. He takes it home, and then you find out that his family's poor because they want to use the toe as part of food, so they end up using it. And eventually, a figure who you don't get to see from the short story basically appears and starts on the street moaning out, where's my toe? And then it gets to the inside the house, his back door opens, and eventually it gets to the big jump scare at the bed where, it's revealed that, the villain knows that he's the one who has the toe. And there's also an alternate ending. I actually like the alternate ending more, where it's a strange looking creature that he does encounter face to face down the chimney. And it's sort of a play on the wolf from Red Riding Hood, where he's like, why do you have those big claws? Why do you have those long fingers? What do you have that big mouth and teeth for? And of course, it's to eat the kids. So, yeah, that's essentially the short story. But in the movie, it gets expanded upon more. You have the main character basically getting singled out in his house. And unfortunately, again, like we brought up, he has to find out the hard way that he is getting stuck inside of a story because he starts eating some stew that was left behind for him. And right, of course, at the wrong moment, he realized that he ate a toe. And that's because the story started manifesting. So he has to puke that up. But before, he's really able to kind of save himself, the figure starts coming after him. And the figure in this segment actually does look like the illustration from Haunted House. It has a very similar look to it. So that's pretty cool. I'm sure he'll pull up the illustration here. Yeah, there you go. Literally looks like the description for the haunted house illustration, same type of thing. And the thing I like about the movie segment is when he hides in his room and he hides under the bed and he starts investigating. It feels like for anybody out there who's watched short horror films have the same type of vibe where it's a lot of suspense, a lot of build up, a lot of tension, and you really start getting your heart rate up because you're like, when is that jump scare coming? When is that jump scare coming? It doesn't come soon enough. But when it does hit, I got jump scared the hell out of, man. And what happens to him, bro? The fact that his bed gets turned into like an elongated pocket dimension of darkness, that he gets dragged down by this horrific demonic looking wraith thing. It's horrific. So yeah, I think the movie segment did better in that regard. It fleshed it out. It made it a threat. Does it have the same heartbeat and structure? Yes. What's the bigger punchline? The movie. So I give it to the movie there.
Yeah, I think the heartbeat of both stories, the big toe is like bait, or I guess the moral should be don't take things, and I guess eat things that don't belong to you. Taking from possibly somebody that you don't know, a complete stranger, finding something, claiming it that it's yours. This is based on probably a urban legend. I don't know which one, but it's probably the morality tale because every urban legend out there has some sort of morality element to it that makes it endearing and makes it reason. There's a reason why there's a game of telephone and why the stories are constantly shared throughout history. There's morality involved. So I'm assuming that's the heartbeat in both. I think the movie, what makes it more intriguing, is the fact that all of it is done in a way where like the moment that I think what works best for this one is that we know what's going on from the first story. So when we get to the big toe, it makes you think back to the drawing of the story. It makes you think back to the monster coming to get the kid, and you're like, whoa, 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 okay. So we're waiting for this to happen, and I guess it's that suspense in waiting for the inevitable that gets you hooked, and it also works. You know what I mean? Like it's just one of those things that I think it does help if you know the story before you watch it because you're anticipating it better, as opposed to if you don't know the story and you're just watching, you're probably like, "Well, that was a cheap jump scare." You probably wouldn't feel it the same. You know what I mean? But
Plus, in the short story, the kid was already in his bed asleep and he wakes up. Well, compared to the movie where it's like a home invasion, it's akin to a home invasion where he
yeah,
knows someone's going to break into his house and he has to figure out, like, where can I hide? They already know I'm in here. So that's better.
yeah, I do like the home invasion aspect better. Like it adds a more dreary sense of hopelessness, where like you're trapped in the place that you should feel the safest, right? Your home, right? I get the symmetry there in the story, but yeah, this one really does hold up. I don't know if this is like my favorite of the segments of the movie though, but it's definitely like the one of the more memorable ones, and like definitely this like I would say probably the best done in terms of scares of the whole film. Just from the setup and everything, it was as well as it could have gone. Um, so yeah, really like that one too.
Yeah, I definitely think the big toe is definitely like it's definitely for me. It's a standout sequence because it's the one I most vividly remember being the most on edge in the theater because you have no idea what's coming. You know the basic idea of it. You know that this he's gonna get attacked, but you just don't know when it's coming. And there's just such a good job of building suspense from the first time you see the story being written. And you see Augie's name, and you see him just kind of distracting on the phone talking to his mom, and he pulls this pot of stew out of the fridge that apparently his mom didn't make because she's like basically doesn't know what's going on because he literally says, well, somebody made this as he's pulling it out of the fridge. So it's implied this stew just mysteriously appeared in the fridge. And the whole build up, you know that he's gonna eat this toe at some point. And you just see it drags out for a while of just him eating the stew absentmindedly, not paying attention to what he's eating. And you just know what's coming. And when it finally hits, you just see him scoop that spoonful in the mouth and you see the shot of the toast sitting on the spoon. And it's one of the most like squeamish like scenes of the movie, just knowing what that is. And then you just get the whole build up when you hear Stella like reading the story to Augie, and while she suddenly starts reading "Where's My Toe," he hears the voice in his house. Is a really effective little thing, and just the whole sequence of him running upstairs, hiding under his bed, and you just get the really good shot of the corpse like slowly walking down the hallway, and you just hear like it's mostly from Augie's perspective, where he's just hiding under the bed, and you hear like the creaking footsteps as the creature gets closer. You hear the whispers of "Where is my toe?" as it's getting closer. The doorknob creaks and like slowly opens, and like you just get silence for a few moments. There's just silence. You have no idea what's going on. And then just the most suspenseful part is when he's easily peeking up over the bed, because you would think any other horror movie would have had the creature on the bed to have like that quick jump scare there, but this film really cleverly holds off on it. And then suddenly you just get that great jump scare of him getting slammed on the bed and on the floor and dragged back under the bed, and just getting that really awesome close-up shot of the corpse just getting that ear-wrenching scream and just dragging Augie under the bed. And the one little detail that the movie left out that this version of the story does is that it actually describes that as Augie's getting dragged back, his fingernails get ripped clean off of his fingers as he's being dragged back. It's like that little detail. And then the aftermath when Stella and Ramon arrive and they pull the bed back, and you just see the fingernail claw marks like just ending at the wall. Is again, it's just another chilling way to end it.
It's also the only instance in the movie where a person is specifically getting singled out and hunted, because Harold is already pre-existing. The other segments in the movie have other people surrounding whoever's getting targeted, so they're not fully alone. Here, it was literally a kid home alone, and the entity was not pre-existing. It manifested on the spot just for the sake of hunting him down, and there was nobody around him to come in time, because Harold was reaping what you sow. This kid was just unfairly targeted. It was not a matter of, he did anything. It was literally just him being a target, and nobody was there to save him until they saw the aftermath. And that's messed up, because the team morale goes down after this scene. Because when you see a guy's fingernails going through a floorboard, you don't know where he went. You were just like, we could have been here. We could have helped him. We knew something was off, and we lost him. It's not like Tommy where we don't give a shit about this bully. No, this is our friend, and we could have done something, but we didn't make it in time. So that's when they start slowly figuring out that we're screwed, and we're screwed in a lot of ways.
Kind of reminds me of Vecna from Stranger Things season 4. Like you got like random people being picked off by Vecna, and then like some people are periphery, some people are in the friend group. That's what the scene kind of reminds me of. Is like in season 4 there was what is Sadie Sink's character's name? The redhead girl.
Chrissy.
Yeah, Chrissy. When she starts getting targeted by Vecna, like you're like, no, don't do that. No, don't kill her. That's how you feel with this guy in the movie. So same effect. So yeah, I like the points y'all brought up on that one. What's the next one that we should talk about? We got what?
Red Spot's the next one.
So Red Spot. I guess I'll take this one over. So to talk about both, Red Spot, the short story is like a page. Like most of these, simply about like a girl. She gets a spider bite on her face, and I guess she's preening, in her bathroom before she's going to bed, and the boil pops and a spider comes out of her face. No different in the movie. I mean, but the setup there is that we spend more time with the girl. I think setting up her being what is she, like Tommy's girlfriend in the movie? Or
yep, she's
like
Tommy's girlfriend and Chuck's older sister.
Chuck's older sister, yeah. So she obviously is in the wrong. So she's one of the characters that deserve the comeuppance. And she has this hideous spider bite that I think she got when she was involved on Halloween night trying to find the motley crew of kids. But the spider bite, when the story kicks on, it triggers her. I think she's in her high school bathroom or something. Like, I think she's a cheerleader or something similar. And she goes to the bathroom to check out her boil because she feels like it's moving. And there's a scene where you see in very gross detail the spider legs slowly poking out of the boil, make sure it has enough room and a big enough hole to get out. and then it crawls out of her face and leaves this nasty open gash on her face, and the spider gets let loose. And later on in the movie, we find out that she had to get stitches on her face, so she had a scar from that experience. Um, yeah, this one I think they do more of the spider. I think just the addition of that, where it literally just adds on where the story ended. The story literally ended in the short story, where like, oh, it just pops out of her face. But what does it do? Like, does it eat her? Does it chase her away? Does it put her in a web, cocoon, whatever? This kind of explores, I guess, the spider nature of it. But also, we get to see the aftermath of the character and like the scar that it leaves, right? And this perhaps deals more with her character specifically in the movie. Like, obviously, she lost Tommy due to this ordeal. So I guess you can look at the symbology there. I don't. I think the short story took inspiration from the spider and the hairdo urban legend, where a girl, like, she's, I guess, set in the 50s, and she has like the beehive hairdo, and she's always using hairspray, never showering, and spiders make nests in her hair, and she's in the bathroom preening it one day, and the spiders just explode out of her head, and you see the scene where she's like seeing spiders crawling down her face, and she has a mental break and starts cutting off all of her hair. And then once people find her, she's like so far gone out of her mental stability that she gets sent to a loony bin, right? I think that's where the story was inspired from. But yeah, the movie I just think does more of the spider. Even though I think the red spot as a kid freaked me out, the image of the spider boil girl freaked me out so bad because it had the body horror, and as a kid, probably the two scariest movies to me were Jeff Goldblum's The Fly and Earth versus the Spider, which were body horror insect movies, and anything involving that, like, still terrifies me today. So, I looked at the art the other day about it, and it still made me think about being in my second grade class reading through that book and seeing that artwork and just being petrified.
I think
I think the movie did good justice on it too.
I think really only like the two things that, because this, I think Red Spot is like the most accurate to the story out of all the adaptations, but I think the two only things that it adds that still makes it slightly better, in my opinion, is it has that mean girl aspect where the mean popular girl obsessed with her looks and beauty basically kind of gets, come up and gets what's coming to her. And then the main thing that I think made this one better for me was actually, like you said, the aftermath, but not the stitches alone, but immediately after the spiders start crawling out of her face. She runs to the back of the bathroom. She gets the water poured on her or whatever. And just seeing her shake violently, like convulse and be like PTSD, Rick. And like the story you mentioned where that girl is so far gone that she has to get taken to a loony bin. The sister has that where she has people comforting her and she's just spasming out. Like she had this really horrific experience. The spiders are gone, but she's still freaking out as if they're still crawling over her. So that addition made it a little more effective because I was like, okay, this girl is mentally screwed now. She's never going to forget this experience. So hers was more psychological effect, even with the body horror. So that's the
Yeah,
more effective stuff.
I have to agree. I think this one not only felt the most like the short story counterpart, but it also felt the more true urban legend in nature. Like, it feels the most cut and dry. Like, if somebody said that this was an urban legend you can find in a collection like, I don't know, this with a bunch of urban legends, I'd believe it because it sounds close enough. It's not like a creepy pasta monster like the big toe monster or Harold or anything like that. No, this is just like a comeuppance tale, and it's supposed to give you a moral. Don't be vain. Don't be mean. Don't be obsessed with your looks because you can look hideous, and then what do you have to show for it? You know.
Yeah, I think the red spot, again, the movie handled it a little bit better. There's a lot of like stuff, just like the visual of like seeing that like spider crawl out of the boil is like one of the most squeamish like scenes in the movie. And then just like it's just like the one, and there's like thousands of tiny spiders that just keep crawling out, like covering her face. And like when Stella, Ramon, and Chuck get to the bathroom, you just see the spiders are like covering the walls and ceiling of the bathroom. And like just again, like seeing how it affects Ruth, like even though she was kind of a jerk throughout the movie and like it's kind of a comeuppance story, you do feel bad for her because she's like sobbing and just screaming and convulsing. And like especially Chuck's reaction, just like how heartbroken he is over seeing his sister in this kind of a state. And again, the story in this goes even further to say that it pretty much confirms like Ruth, she goes insane. Like it literally ends with her like she like her and it ends up like saying like as she's like crying and it's being wheeled away into the stretcher, like a deranged smile breaks across her face and she just starts cackling into the sky because of this event. And then it's even further expanded in the dream version story, which we'll get into more later. But when Chuck is in the hospital, he's like roaming the halls and he encounters a bunch of like mentally insane people. And he ends up coming across Ruth sitting in her cell, still talking about the spiders crawling all over her and acting like the spiders are still there, even when they're not. And it's just like, it really shows just how much this is like messed her up.
Yeah,
that is basically the Beehive hairdo urban legend to the T.
We thought the movie was bad. This movie adaptation book is just making everything even worse for the characters. They're getting more and more bad stuff done to them.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of wish they leaned more into that aspect in the movie, like just played up more of like, you know, she still thinks the spiders are there and just played more into that.
Because like the only thing we get
I would say because then it would be like you understand like it goes further than what the short story did. Like obviously, you know, there's psychosis, there's PTSD, mentally being locked in to that moment in time, can never escape it. The asylum of the mind is more harming than the fucking padded cell that you're stuck in. You know, that would have been cool.
Also, let's look at the sequence of who's getting targeted too. That also shows like the layers of how Sarah Bello targets, because the first person who gets targeted is Tommy. So she's targeting the person that they fear, the person that they're afraid of, that they treat as the monster. Sarah Bello's taking out that guy and be like, no, there's a bigger monster out here. Don't be afraid of that human one. There's worse things here. The second target is their friend. So they lose their immediate part of their team. And this one is a loved one getting targeted. So Chuck gets the main brunt of this because he's seeing his loved one, get absolutely messed up, even according to the short story. So Sarah Bello in this kind of timeline is basically going one by one to each of the different aspects of people that are close to them, who they fear, who's immediate, who's your loved ones, and being like, nobody's safe. You are going to get psychologically derailed at many levels. And by this point, they are all at their most vulnerable because they've seen 3 different types of people in their lives get absolutely messed up. So at this point, what could they really do?
Yeah, and then like at the end of that scene too, Chuck gives that great line where after like Ruth is stretched into the hospital, he's just like, my sister is gone. We're next. And like just that like that sense of hopelessness and fear he has in his voice in that sequence is like, it's really effective and just really sets in stone how scared these characters are now at this point.
Because think about if you were in the situation. If your bully's gone, your friend's gone, your sister's gone, nothing you can do.
Well, I think it's also based around the fact that, you know, when they all go into Sarah's house, you know, all the people involved that stepped foot in the house got targeted or were going to be targeted. So I don't know. Maybe BD's onto something about the order of it, but I don't know if it plays like maybe we can go back to see the order of who entered the house first or whatnot. Maybe there's some like subliminal thing going on there. I don't know.
Yeah. It's not literal what I'm saying. I'm saying that like obviously everyone who was in there get targeted, but I'm just talking about like the layers of destroying.
Yeah, I get that too. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah. So what we got next? We got to talk about Chuck's story next.
Yep, the dream.
The dream.
I can get into that one. All right, so the dream, the short story in the original Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, book number 3, is, in my opinion, one of the most lackluster stories in the original trilogy. For having such an awesome and terrifying illustration to accompany it, the story itself just does not deliver. It's basically about this young girl, or not this young girl, young woman, who is an artist. And she is basically like traveling into different areas to do paintings and things like that. And one night she gets this strange dream where she's in this house where she's walking up this like rickety wooden staircase, and she enters this room that has like trapdoor looking carpeting, boards on the windows. And in the middle of the night while she is sleeping, this creepy pale woman appears in her room and basically tells her, "This is an evil place, flee while you can." And when the woman touches her arm, she wakes up out of this nightmare. And basically she decides, okay, I'm not going to go where I was planning to because this may be some kind of bad omen. And she ends up switching her locations around. And her landlady recommends this place called Dorset, this small town. And so she goes there and goes to this like bed and breakfast kind of place, meets the woman. The landlady's very nice. And as she's led up to her room, she walks up the same staircase from her dream. The room she's led to is the same room from her dream. And this landlady basically like tells her, like, I'll get some tea while you think about the room. She leaves. And after a while of sitting there, a knock comes at the door. And when the main character opens it, the pale woman is standing there. And so the main character grabs her things and runs. And that story is just it's kind of ambiguous on what the pale woman is. If she's just it almost feels like she's more benevolent in the story. She has a much more helpful spirit, like warding her off of danger. So like I kind of like to imagine it's like almost like that landlady was going to like poison the tea or something like that, and the pale lady appeared to kind of warn her and get her out. But yeah, it's kind of a lackluster story. I think making the pale lady of like such a terrifying drawing, but having her be a benevolent, friendly spirit is a little kind of lackluster. But then you get the movie. It blows this short story out of the water. Where basically it's Chuck's turn. And like another little bit of nitpick, I think, is that Chuck kind of just randomly says that, oh, I had this cleared up dream again. Like, it's kind of a little bit of a plot hole because he never is established to have this dream at any point else in the movie. And it's like right as they're about to visit the old like servant of the Bellows family, he just randomly mentions that he has this dream about a red room and a pale woman. And obviously it's kind of like us Scary Stories fans immediately know what he's talking about. But it does feel kind of random and kind of just forced in there. I wish there was kind of a scene of him maybe having a nightmare like that beforehand to establish that. But anyways, when they go to this hospital to get some records on Sarah Bellows to try and find things to help them, they end up learning that the records room is called the Red Room. So Chuck freaks out. He's like, I don't want to go in there. You know my dream. I know that Sarah Bellows is going to use that against me. And so he like insists on staying behind while Ramon and Stella go into the room to start kind of gathering evidence because they sneak in because it's a restricted area. And Chuck ends up getting caught by some orderlies and is like running away trying to escape from them. And while he's kind of lost in these hallways, the orderlies set off an alarm. And this alarm turns all of the lights in the hospital a bright, blaring red color, turning the entire hospital into a giant red room. So, Chuck freaks out. There's a little bit beforehand where, Ramon and Stella are listening to this like wax cylinder that showcases Sarah's past and showcases that she was basically tortured by her brother to try and get this information, just to hide the truth of what was happening with her family. And just like this, on a random switch of a dime, you suddenly hear the Sarah's ghost take over the recording and start reciting the story of the dream. And meanwhile, Chuck is running through the halls, kind of freaking out, wandering around, trying to see like what's happening. And he's obviously panicking because now the whole hospital is red. And suddenly you just see, he just like looks down the hallway, and at the end of the hallway, you see the pale woman just standing there. And you get this really close-up shot of her just slowly walking towards him. She has this really big, creepy grin on her face, and she's just kind of giggling to herself, which is just it's really creepy and unsettling the way they do her in this movie. But Chuck starts trying to run in the opposite direction to try and basically escape the pale woman. And instead, he finds that she's down the hallway he tries to run down. And then he tries another hallway, and she's there too. And no matter where he runs, whatever hallway he's down, she's always there, always the same distance away in every one of them. So no matter where he goes, she is always getting closer and closer to him with no hope of escape. And I would say it's probably the scariest sequence of the movie, just in terms of that like living nightmare kind of feel. It feels hopeless as Chuck feels hopeless too, obviously, because he knows there's nothing he can do. He just has to stand there and watch his inevitable death slowly approaching him without anything to stop it. And eventually she does close him in, and probably another really horrific sequence. She absorbs him into her body, and it's just like, I don't know how they came up with that, but it's so unsettling the way they do it. And it's just really, I guess it's almost like a play on earlier how Chuck hated his mom smothering him. So I think it's kind of meant to be a play on, playing into that fear of that motherly love and embrace that he had, but now turning it against him. And again, this short story actually expands a bit more and does a little bit more cool stuff that I kind of wish was in the movie, where it describes that the Pale Lady manifests from like dripping paint and plaster, where like Chuck is, perspirating and sweating from all his running. And like the heat from his body is described that it rises to the top of the ceiling, and slowly paint and plaster begins dripping from the ceiling and begins forming into the Pale Lady as she slowly like lowers down from the ceiling. And that's basically like the biggest change. And also, again, it gives a little bit more in depth on Chuck's experience in the mental hospital, encountering some of the patients. He encounters Ruth. And there's also a bit of a funny joke sequence in there where he's like so relieved that everything is like all the walls are white because he's just trying to escape the red room, that he's just like wandering around giddily, just like celebrating all the whiteness around him. He even like does a joke where he goes to buy like white chocolate from the vending machine because he's so just like thankful that he's away from anything red. And then, the story happens and kind of screws him over. Yeah, the one nitpick I would say about the story is that it does kind of end on a joke where, like, as he's getting absorbed, Chuck says one last joke. But I mean, it fits his character. So, but I think the movie definitely ends more effectively. But I think there's some stuff in this adaptation that I wish was that actually is added into the movie, because it also seems like, according to some concept art, they were originally going to reference the illustration from the story Footsteps, because I don't know if you can see, but the feet and legs from the Stephen Gamble illustration pressing down from the ceiling. So I think they were going to reference that illustration there.
Yeah, Footsteps is a great piece of artwork. That one always stuck out to me as a kid. The short story, the spirit's benevolent. It's more so just a warning tale. Your dreams come into fruition to protect the lady. She gets out of there in time. But yeah, in the movie, it's a very messed up motherly vibe. Even, the fact that it's a very plump, happy, smiling lady almost feels like that motherly embrace is to absorb him, as in a bad way. The fact that he has trauma with his mother, he doesn't like that stuff. That getting to him is good. And the living nightmare, the fact that he keeps getting approached, there's nowhere to escape. And that's also messed up because it just kind of lets you know that, at least in the other stories, it was almost like something that they did is what caused them to be in this messed up situation. Here, the kid is literally in a directly visible way. Like, he could do everything right. He could do all the right moves, all the right jukes, all the right turns. There's no hope. You're going to end up in the same situation no matter what stunt you try to pull off. So it's really hopeless.
Yeah, I have to agree with y'all's sentiment on there. I read the short story for the first time in a long time, I think the other day. I thought it was weird. I don't like the ending being as ambiguous as it is, because it's like, okay, well, is the Pale Lady there to like harm her, or is there to help her? Like, it's kind of up in the air. I think it's more implied, like y'all said, to be kind of like a warning sign, a premonition dream, and the fact that an old woman is depicted to be there, the caretaker of this inn in this city. She's supposed to be the unsuspecting villain of the story, right? Like somebody you don't think would harm a person, right? I don't think that's quite there in the movie. But then again, the idea with the paint, why wasn't that in the film? That should have been in the movie. I'm not sure if that book is maybe the original idea of the screenplay.
I think it is. I think that's kind of what it's meant to be.
Okay, that's what it is. I'm curious to see if they shot any of that or tried to shoot any of that and just didn't make it in. Maybe because they had to trim out. It seems like this is a type of movie, since it's over 90 minutes. There probably was a 2 hour plus cut of the film,
Mm-hmm.
and they probably
Yeah, here's
convinced
another
thousands
piece of concept
of.
art for that pale lady
Yeah.
manifesting.
That's a really sick idea. I mean, I can just imagine the visual of that. If I would have saw that as like a 7-year-old kid, I would have been just traumatized to go to bed. I couldn't fall asleep. But I will say, if there's one of the few scenes that you need to watch in the dark of this film, it's the pale lady. You need to watch this in the dark. The red, something about it, man. When you got the chromatics working and you got your peripheries all blackened out, and you can only focus on the screen. I'm telling you, it is terrifying stuff. It is really good. It's probably my second favorite. And no, I think Pale Lady and Harold are kind of tied, directly in second place for me behind the big toe monster scene. As my favorite. I just really like the color hues in this scene as well. The lighting. I don't know. It has like a creep show esque vibe to it. If it had more blues, I would have been like sold. I'm like, oh yeah, it's itching to scratch. I need right now. Um, but yeah, in terms of like what it's able to do, I think this is another one kind of similar to the Big Toe character, because we know the story and what the character looks like, and also because the characters are aware of what's going on. I think this one is kind of enhanced by that in terms of like how the story's playing out, and at least in terms of the through line story. That makes this one a little more enjoyable, each and every time for that reason for me. Just because the comedic relief character is getting killed. Normally the comedic relief characters in these type of movies die first or like second. So, or unless you're Randy from Scream, you live at least through a whole movie. So, uh, you know, this is probably the most sad death of the whole movie to me. Like losing him, Chuck. I mean, that gets to me every time I watch it.
Yeah, especially because like Chuck is like so much more than just comedic relief. Like, yeah, he is obviously the comic relief character, but like, there's a lot of depth to him too, and like you just see him like slowly get more and more afraid and less comedic as the movie goes on, as the situation grows more dire. Because I feel like in a lesser movie, a character like Chuck would stay comedic throughout the whole movie. He wouldn't like have any sense of fear, any sense of like impending doom, and would kind of stay the lighthearted, jokey self throughout the movie. But no, he slowly gets more and more scared as his turn gets closer. And there's even a funny little fake out when they're like researching. It's a little of a joke, but it's still a funny little bit where in the research sequence when the red spot story is coming, Chuck had previously spilled a drop of ketchup on his shirt. And so when they see the red spot story running, they just look at Chuck and see the ketchup stain, and he just starts like freaking out. And there's like that really good, that little line where he's like, I haven't even had sex yet, as he's like panicking. Like that's the one thing he's worried about before he has to die.
Well, it's probably on the forefront of a teenager's mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a man yet.
Especially in the 60s. You had nothing else to do.
Yeah, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have much entertainment. I mean, you go to the drive-in, you go home, watch TV, or go hang out with your friends. Social life meant a lot more back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess street cred. All right, so what's the next one we have to talk about? Is that Jangly Man?
Yep, that's the fusion of Me Tai Dodie Walker and What Do You Come For?
What do you come for?
And also the look of it, kind of in a similar way, matches Aaron Kelly's Bones, that story of that corpse walking. So, yeah, Meet Dido D. Walker is a little goofy, creepy story about a kid who basically is kind of house sitting for a very rich guy who's paying him like $500 or something, which back during the time of this story would have been a lot of money if you count inflation. So he ends up house sitting, and he just asks one request that he can bring his dog with him. So his dog ends up staying the night to get prepared. And there's an urban legend within the urban legend where the urban legend of this house is that there's some weird phenomenon that happens, and then a severed head will fall down the chimney little area and come down. So he sort of has that in the back of his mind. And then there's a song that's being played out by somebody out, outside in the woods area that's like Me Tai Do T Walker. And then next thing you know, the dog starts speaking, and it starts speaking the second part of the hymn, which I don't remember what it is, but it's something like cuckoo doo doo something like that. There's some weird line. But the dog starts physically talking and speaking. And then, as the dog recites the line, the voice that's saying "Me Tai Doti Walker" becomes closer, and then the dog recites. So it's almost like Marco Polo. One says Marco, one says Polo. They start getting closer together, and then eventually, which is what the illustration is, a severed head of an old man falls down the chimney scape, lands in front of the dog. The dog falls over and dies of fright, and then the head ends up screaming at the boy, animated. And what do you come for? It's about a lady who's in her, I think, like living space, and severed body parts start slowly coming down the chimney. First starts with some feet that are dangling. They come down, then comes the rest part of the body, and then it turns into a animate corpse that starts dancing violently around the entire little area. And then it looks to her and it's like, "I came for you." So those are the two fusions. So in the movie, I think it took those two sort of mediocre stories. What you came for is a creepy idea. It has creepy visuals, but the other one's okay. And it made it into the Jangly Man. The Jangly Man, personally, is my favorite monster from the movie. I would say that I am the biggest creature feature head out of the trio, and just the idea of the Jangly Man being severed body parts coming down, the fact that the dog in the movie is not speaking. So in Meet Doti Walker, the dog is speaking. It's speaking like a human, which is weird. It's just weird that a dog would speak. But in the movie, it's like growling. It's growling out the hymn of that second part, which is fun. It makes it more realistic in a sense. And then when that jangly man starts putting itself together, it literally gets up, look at the police officer, and then fucking twists his head around. It literally snaps his head, goes backward. It's an immediately brutal kill. And then the jangly man, even though it's standing upright, it then for motion starts contorting its body in like a very strange way and then starts targeting Ramon because Ramon is the target of that thing. So yeah, the Jangly Man is horrific. The whole scene, the driving sequence where that Jangly Man is on top of the car has what we brought up before, the Jeepers Creepers vibe, the Popsy vibe, a monster on top of a car attacking it while you're driving. And the way that it ends is quite brutal, involving a car crash, the Jangly Man getting smashed against something and then falling apart as it deanimates. So that's pretty fun. And also the police officer, I think, does like a witty line when the corpse starts coming down. He says something like, "You got to be shitting me" or something. So that was also a little bit of comedy thrown in. So yeah, Jangly Man's my favorite monster. I think he was cool, and even though he is unique, I definitely would have liked to seen something like that from the books because they had Aaron Kelly's bones and animate corpse dancing and walking around. They could have made it more horrific instead of that comedic story. So I liked it.
Yeah, I have to say, Jangly Man is probably my favorite portion of the movie personally, because it has a lot. It has a lot more fun in terms of what's going on action wise. It's not just like a little small like adaptate like it's there for an adaptation's sake. It feels like I don't know, like it feels like they had the most fun with this sequence of the film. Like because at this point you're down to two main characters left. Well, technically three, but mainly two, and they're at their wits end with it all. And you have this monster come out. It's like kind of like a homunculus creature where it's just a bunch of different body parts coming together. The monster design looks fantastic. Um, and like I was telling Micah in our collab, I was like, the scene with like the cars, that was incredible. Because it's like probably the most action packed scene of the whole film, and it's thrilling and it's fun. The police officer death was brutal. Like you don't need to kill Ramon because obviously if you kill Ramon, you're just left with Stella. Then you don't have the end of the movie. But I do like that this is like the one villain that they kind of conquer. You know what I mean? Like the Jangly Man. It makes sense that this one's the most conquerable one because unlike the others, it's like a homunculus made of like already decapitated and not knock loose body parts. All you gotta do is make sure it gets knocked loose again, and you're good.
It's also the
So
only one that's a mindless killing machine. The other ones sort of have
yeah,
more like sinister buildup. This one just attacks whatever's nearby. I also think it's fun that Ramon, obviously prizes his car. That's where him and Tommy got into the whole beef, and now he gets a chance to drive and basically take out this thing. So that's fun. That his passion basically ended up being how he conquered this thing. So that was cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
this was a fun one.
Yeah, there's a lot to the movie that does it really well. Obviously, there's a big twist involving Ramon in the scene where we reveal that he is a draft dodger, and the reason the Jangly Man is the monster that targets him is because it was based off a campfire story that Ramon said terrified him as a kid. So another one of Cerebello's targeting a specific fear from the victim, but it also goes into describing how the reason the reason he was dodging the Vietnam draft is because his brother was drafted and they shipped him back in pieces. So he just kind of has this like lingering trauma, like I don't want to die in this war. He even has a great line where he says they just send you there to die. And like that's another significance of the Jangly Man is that he falls down the chimney in pieces, much like what happened to his brother. And so there's like a lot of great symbolism with Ramon in that sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that again, the Jangly Man is definitely the most intense monster and the most like visually disturbing. I think just the way he contorts his body and the way he like has these always like really grunts and like groans as he's contorting himself, almost as if it's painful for him to contort or something like that. I think is really unsettling. Again, that animalistic nature is really intense and this leads for that fun car chase. And the short story in here is actually mostly similar to the movie, except it actually has the dog speaking. This version does have the dog speaking it. Even though it's not like the voice from Mita Dodi Walker isn't heard outside like the short story. It's just the dog saying the two things back to back. So it's a little lackluster there, I feel like, and the rest of the short story is pretty much identical to the way it happens in the movie.
Yeah,
but there is during this sequence, there's one piece of like, even though this isn't actually in the story, there is one piece of concept art that I am so bummed did not make it into the movie.
Yes.
And it is basically where the Jangly Man in this piece of artwork fuses John Carpenter's The Thing style with the police chief and has this whole like apparently I'm guessing that's how he was going to be, and here's even another shot at like some artwork of how they were going to design that.
We did not get that because it looks like a messed up sculpture art, man. It looks awesome that it fuses with other people.
Yeah, I do really wish that was going, because that would have been a really cool little sequence to see some body horror played out. And even the Jangly Man's like design is a little different in the artwork, where it's not like a resurrected corpse, and he's more just this like wide-eyed, smiling man, pretty much. And I think there's even like I think this is actually meant to be a shot of Jangly Man, like art of Jangly Man's face too.
That is sick.
So that was the original idea for him, which I do wish made it into the final cut of the movie, because that would have been really cool. I'm not sure if the budget just didn't allow for that kind of design, or if they thought that was maybe going too far for PG-13 or something like that. But yeah, I do wish that was in the movie. But yeah, I think the sequence is really great. Again, I think it's definitely the most symbolic for the character and the most personal, just knowing Ramon's backstory. And it leads to Ramon having a great arc. And even like in the end, when he's stuck, there's whole sequence of him being stalked by the Jangly Man in the Bellows house while Stella is off doing her thing, being trapped in her own story. And just that whole sequence of like when he's trying to hide and he sees the Jangly Man just like hiding on the ceiling and like jumps down, or like the scene where he's like contorting himself over the banister trying to chase him down and stuff. Like there's a lot of great stuff with the Jangly Man. He's definitely the most prominent monster of the movie. He's the one that stays in there for the longest. He's in some ways kind of the biggest threat, even though he's still the most easily defeatable. But there's a lot, and also I like the little fun detail, like after Ramon smashes him with the car into the truck, how the Jangly Man just has the ability to like let himself fall apart and then piece himself back together again. I think is another really cool aspect of him, is like just continuing this one with like this unstoppable beast that just keeps chasing you down.
Well, it's also the only case where there's no anticipation for like with Harold, you had to wait to see what Harold was going to do. Red Spot, you wait. The toe, you wait. Here, they saw what it did to the police officer. Like they openly saw what this thing was going to do to them. So they're flat out knowing that it's going to be a violent, brutal death, and that's why they have to avoid it. So
fair points. Do we have some more to talk about? I think what do we have left?
I mean, technically there's also the haunted house, yeah, because that's Stella's story. We don't need to go too much in depth on that, but
yeah, that's a little loose because the haunted house. So the short story, I love that short story. I mean, I don't really want to compare it as an adaptation because they're really two different things for what the movie's going for. But the short story of the haunted house is basically about a priest who ends up having to go to a haunted house to kind of do like a murder mystery and exorcise it. He brings his Bible, he's reading it by the fireplace, and this wraith, this haunt, has scared away people from the house. So each at periodic times throughout the night, the haunt comes up the stairs of the cellar trying to get to the door, and he manages to kind of, in a way, unintentionally stop it from coming out and greeting him. But eventually, it does come out and greet him, and that's the horrific appearance, which is the monster from Where's My Toe? That whole no eye socket, corpse, and the haunt basically tells him that, I was murdered by this man who's still out there and basically free. And, if you manage to bury my bones properly, if you give me a proper burial and let me rest, I have a way that you can catch the culprit. And it's this finger bone that she gives him after she grabs his coat. And that finger bone at church during the communion ends up sticking to a guy's hand, and they figure out that he's the one who murdered the lady. He gets thrown to jail, and it's described that where this haunt basically touched his leather coat, there was burn marks in it. But that really doesn't come into the movie. The movie is really more so the resolution of Sarah Bellows. Now, the only parallel you could draw is there's a sympathetic ghost and haunted house, and here it's a sympathetic ghost because it's Sarah Bellows. You sympathize with them. They're not malevolent. They're more so tortured, unjust souls that need a proper, conclusion. But that's really about as far as that goes.
Yeah, the closest parallel you get is again this book describes it as titles it as the haunted house, and on top of that there is the when in the movie when Ramon discovers the book after kind of just defeating the jangly man, or not defeating him but escaping him for a bit. That's the title of the story that's being written for Stella. So that's kind of the parallel it draws there. But yeah, it's a pretty loose adaptation overall.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us to the resolution of the movie and all of that. Obviously Sarah Bellows, the main villain of the movie. She, I guess, is given a little more backstory, and Stella helps reveal that to her in the haunted house segment, I guess, of the film, and we get to see what becomes of that. If you haven't seen the movie, there is kind of a happy ending for Ramon and Stella. Uh, Given it all, and possibly there's some breadcrumbs definitely left on the table for a sequel, which we still haven't gotten in 6 years, almost 7 years now.
Yep.
It probably never will get made. And we, in the movie there, which brings me, I guess, to the overall comparison before we get into our little discussion. Do you think that as a whole, the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books, all 3 original volumes, if you want to throw in a Dark Room by Alvin Schwartz as like an honorary 4th one, whatever, do you think that the movie kind of elevates it into a different level, or do you think that it honors it in a way and keeps it on a similar level?
I personally think it elevates it in a lot of ways. There are some stories that do sometimes work better than the adaptations in the movie, but overall, I think, especially in those specific adaptations, the movie improves on almost every single one of them and expands it a bit more, makes it a bit more fully realized, as if what would this story look like in the real world, and what would the stakes be? And I think that just overall just helps elevate those stories and makes them more effective to me. So I think the movie definitely does it better, as great as those books are.
Yeah. And I do think that inherently, if you're not familiar with the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books out there, or even In a Dark Room by Alvin Schwartz, these stories are like a paragraph long sometimes. Maybe a page. By a page I mean like big text, longer paragraph. Sometimes you'll get 3 pages out of one. Depends. But most of the time they're very, very, very short. So taking a story concept that short, which is basically just an outline of what you can fill in the gaps between, and being able to add on to it, doesn't necessarily sound too hard on paper. But what this movie does exceptionally well is that for the most part, it keeps the heartbeat of the stories it's taken from, and it elevates it, in my opinion. I just think that they're able to do what the stories kind of were able to do, but it's able to show you in that medium more than a paragraph could do in terms of text. You know what I mean? Sometimes when we're talking about adaptations from story to screen, the films, or I guess episodes, sometimes the runtime in terms of minutes, the visual matters more than what you're imagining in your brain, and a lot of that has to do with the length. I personally think that I think the movie isn't necessarily way better than the books, but I strongly prefer the direction of the movie. If that makes any sense. You know, I'm not a super big fan of super short stories, but I do love urban legends, and a lot of them are short inherently. And I think scary stories to tell in the dark mostly is the exception for me when it comes to these little series, because I know that they're all inspired from urban legends and myths and folklore and stuff from various cultures. So personally, I think the movie is more my speed when it comes to this franchise. BD, you have anything you want to add?
I'd probably say it honors it. Mainly because I think that the movie is its own kind of separate thing it evolved into compared to the books. The movie's really, as a standalone, a fantastic movie, and they just managed to integrate the stories well. But I think that the book series has a different purpose. It's really just to get the mind of a kid into that horror space, that urban legend space, and really just paranoia. Because I remember when I read these books as a kid, it's not even really that the short stories are anything that stand out. You know, there are a few that are very creepy, but mostly Stephen Gamel's artwork is to get you in that entirely unique world where you start getting paranoid of your surroundings, you're scared of the dark, you know, you really embody it. And you see that with the artwork. The artwork is very sort of artistic, landscape. It almost feels like you're entering into this sketch world compared to the movie, who I think that just the directors, you know, expertise, you know, as we saw with the last voyage of Demeter, autopsy of Jane Doe. I think if you would have given him pretty much any series, he would have done a fantastic job if you had this type of formula, just because he would know how to work them into the plot of the movie. So, yeah, I think it's more so honoring it, but I think it's its own thing. I think this movie, as a standalone, if you were to put in, let's say, for example, Goosebumps or any other series, they would have managed to do a fantastic job either way, integrating those stories within a general concept like this.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree. I think Andre Overdahl is in my top five favorite directors. I think he's extremely underrated, not talked about nearly enough as he should be in the horror space. You know, everybody talks about Mike Flanagan and Ty West and all these guys. No, they need to be talking about Andre Overdahl. Give him some, give him some juice, and he'll make some sweet lemonade out of it. You know what I mean? Um, but I think we're all in agreement that for the most part, that at least in comparing the stories that the movie is adapting versus the source material, for the most part, I think we all seem to be on the fence that the movie does them better, right? So, in terms of the stories we talked about today, for the most part, I think the movie kind of beats out the source material. And I want to say it's by a large margin, maybe with a few stories here and there, like Me Heidi Toe or whatever it's called. Me Heidi, what is it?
He said Odie Walker.
Mihai Tody Walker. Okay, Mihai Tody Walker, or the other story that kind of feeds into the Jangly Man. I think we all agree that the Jangly Man's way better, or better when you combine them.
The Dream is way better.
The Dream is way better. Harold is kind of up in the air, but I think the short story is better there personally. Um, I think for the Red Spot being as faithful as it is, we still like the movie better. And then, of course, the Toe story,
Better.
I think we all like it in the movie better. Because why would you want to see them actually have the cannibal idea of them trying to eat a toe on purpose? You know what I mean? So, I get the whole random stew thing. But we all gave the movie. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I think Micah gave it a 5 out of 5. BB says it's a 5 out of 5. y'all need to go watch this movie. What are y'all doing? Go watch all of Andre Overdahl's movie. Go watch Last Voyage of the Meteor, Autopsy of James Doe, and this movie as a triple feature. They're fantastic. Can't go no wrong. So that leads us into the sad reality, right? Our discussion is that we haven't got a scary stories to tell in the dark too. But if there were to be one, right? And you could pick any story from the line of Alvin Schwartz, whether it's from the 3 volumes of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, whether it's from In a Dark, Dark Room, or whether it's a urban legend that you think would fit nicely into Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. What ideas would you like to see in the follow-up film if it ever happens?
I guess mine will be brief. I think I would just want my favorite stories from the series adapted. I think one of them would be Someone Fell from a Loft. That's my favorite story in the entire series. For those of you who are unaware, Someone Fell from a Loft is basically about these group of boatmen, sailors who are on a boat, and it's described that there is some ghostly paranormal stuff that goes out in the seas, especially when it's nighttime and there's thick mist. And they have a guy on the ship who's the helmsman named McLaren. And this guy is very bossy. He's very sort of uptight and mean. And what happens is that there ends up being somebody that falls from a loft. Except when they get to the corpse that falls, onto the boat, it's this abnormally tall, large figure, this corpse that's in a more decomposing, kind of scary look. And they're very confused as to how somebody fell from a loft because they thought that they were pretty much in control of their operation. They knew where everybody was. And when McLaren sees it, he starts acting funny. He almost immediately tells them to throw it overboard, but nobody wants to approach the corpse. They're all scared to go up to it. So eventually, McLaren, becoming frustrated, goes up to the corpse, reluctantly picks it up, and starts bringing it overboard. And that's when all of a sudden the corpse animates and it wraps his arms around him and basically pulls them overboard off the ship. And as they're falling down and plummeting into the dark depths of the ocean, they hear this demonic cackling coming from the corpse as it's bringing down McLaren. And that's when they get back to basically the port area, they find out a story that McLaren had actually killed a guy on the previous ship he used to work on called the Gertrude. They got into a fight. The tall guy was pretty much picking on him, and he killed him and then threw him overboard. And then people on the ship were afraid to, snitch on him because, McLaren might have killed them. So this is like comeuppance. It's almost like a creep show kind of story. It gets revenge. So I think that would be cool to see adapted. Obviously, it would not be pirates or sailormen, but you could have the main kids getting on a boat, potentially by a port for some reason, or maybe some character ends up there and you get this corpse launching idea. Maybe they're escaping something, and then you get the boat idea. And my other favorite is The Window, which is a demonic vampire story basically about some kids who are in their house and they see this figure outside their window, and the thing actually breaks into their house and ends up attacking one of them, and that person dies. And the next day, when they go to, I guess, the church area where that person is getting buried, they see the corpse, and the corpse that they see ends up looking like the vampire that attacked them. So essentially, they connect that there is some history about vampires attacking people in this area, and the corpse that they saw over by that area, must have been what was responsible. Until that is, the church got involved and took care of it. So I think that you could have a demonic vampire attack similar to Where's My Toe? You could have somebody isolated in a house and this demonic vampire comes up to them. And it's, again, that more so monstrous vampire type. Looks like a rotting corpse, except it's a vampire with fangs. So that'd be cool. So those would be my 2 picks.
Great picks. Mike, I'm going to pass it over to you. What would you like to see done?
So I had there's a few of them ideas. I'll only go around 3 of them just to keep it brief. But the first idea I had was to do the story of The Bride, which is in the second book. And in that short story, it's basically about this I think it's the preacher's daughter who is getting married, and during this wedding reception, they decide to play a bunch of children's games and eventually get to hide and seek. And so the bride ends up going up into this attic in this, I think it was either the church or the house that they were in, and hides in this old trunk because she doesn't think they'll ever find her and easily win. However, as she's getting in, she gets knocked on the head by the lid of the trunk, and the trunk locks. And nobody hears her. She pounded on this. You say that she pounded on the lid for days. Nobody ever found her. And a few years later, the maid, of who the new owner of the house was, went up and saw the trunk and decided to open it to see what contents it was. And she sees the bride sitting there, now a decrepit skeleton. And my maybe adapt that into the movie, into like a sequel, is maybe one of the characters, either their sibling or a parent or something like that, is getting married. And during the wedding, while they're there, the book ends up writing a new story for this bride while they're playing hide and seek. And instead of obviously her getting locked in the trunk and taking years to be found, like the short story, it would be where she gets locked inside the trunk, and as she's trying to get out, cockroaches and other bugs just start spilling into the trunk and basically just eat her alive. And so when the kids end up going up, finishing the story and discovering her, you get a shot that looks like the skeleton from the Stephen Gamble drawing. I think that'd be kind of a cool way of doing that one. I also thought of doing The Girl Who Stood on a Grave from the first book, where basically in that story, it was just a group of friends hanging out, and they heard this urban legend that if you stand on a grave at nighttime, the corpse inside will grab you and drag you down. And one of the girls who was there wants to be brave and just doesn't believe it. And so she is dared to go into the cemetery at night and stick a knife into the ground to prove that she was there. And she does this, but as she's trying to walk away, she can't move and dies of fright because she thinks something grabbed her. Although it turns out they go back to discover her the next day, and she has simply pinned the knife into her skirt. And so my adaptation for the movie could be, I had a little bit more of a character moment for her, where this girl is maybe like the sister of one of the main friend groups, kind of like Ruth was in the original. And she is maybe the first, I'm thinking she's the first one to go, where she doesn't believe them. She thinks that like she's hanging out with all of them in like the house as Stella and Ruth are retelling the story of what happened in Mill Valley during the first movie. And she just kind of scoffs it off. She thinks they're being ridiculous, just trying to scare them. And as established at the beginning of the movie, that she lost her father. And every day she goes to visit his grave to kind of calm her mind, pay respects to him, and just kind of, feel like she's with him again. And kind of longs to have that connection with him again, like she did when he was alive. And during this night, she gets just kind of fed up with them telling the story, thinking it's fake. And she goes to the graveyard at night to just, again, pay respects to her dad, just kind of talk to them because she needs to kind of cool off. And after she leaves, the book starts writing her story. And so Stella and Ruth and them start freaking out and trying to rush to the gravesite. And while the sister is there talking with her dad, she's like, I just wish we could be together again. Like, no one here understands me, things like that. And as she gets up to leave, a hand suddenly like shoots out of the grave and like grabs her leg. And so she starts panicking, and you get this she screams out of fear, and you get this kind of pan out shot replicating the Stephen Gamble illustration. And then once Stella, Ruth, and them all arrive at the cemetery, they see that the grave has somehow been dug up. And when they open the coffin, they see the father's corpse, and then the girl, who is now also a corpse, in her father, almost like laying next to her father. So they're basically together again, but dead. So those are kind of my two main ideas that were most fleshed out.
Those are great ideas. Personally, for me, I just think that there is a story that I think would be interesting if you combined it with another urban legend. There is the story, I forget what it's called, but it's the one about killer in the back seat in the car behind you, flashing the headlights.
High beams.
Yeah, high beams. There's a version. There's multiple versions of the urban legend about the killer in the back seat. One particular one that I've always been a bigger fan of is the one where there's a serial killer, but he's been wounded and he ends up in the back of a woman's car. And then the high beam legend, of course, is true. But as the woman's making the drive, she sees a man bloodied trying to stop the car, and she thinks that that's what the person behind her is warning her of, is this guy that's possibly coming after her. So she thinks in the back of her mind that this bloody maniac's going to kill her. Well, it turns out when she parks her car and she pulls into the gas station, there's a police officer that she flags down. They open the back of the car. They find the killer back there, bloody and wounded. And it turns out that the person that she saw trying to flag her car down was the ghost of a victim who died the night before, who was killed by the killer. So I like that version if you blend it in with high beams. But you also add another urban legend into the mix, the Vanishing Hitchhiker, or better known in the Chicago area, the Resurrection Mary urban legend. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, BD, but there is a ghost. It's a very famous one now, the ghost of Mary Bagoli. Turn of the century, she died in a car accident, and for years, almost a century now, she's been said to haunt the Resurrection Cemetery. Um, that she is said to be laid to rest in, and she's known throughout history to appear to like cab drivers, or she'll be seen walking on the side of the road, or some unsuspecting teenager will pick her up and give her a ride back to her house or to nearby the cemetery where she's asked to be dropped off, and then she vanishes. What I think would be a fun idea is to blend the two together. And the hitchhiker obviously is this killer or malevolent ghost trying to get inside the car of one of the main characters or a teen, and the spotlights behind them is actually the victim of one of her episodes of coming out, materializing, and killing. And the ghost in the car of the ghost is trying to warn the person that's alive that has the hitchhiker in his car that, hey, the person in your car is a killer. You know what I mean? They maybe end up to a cemetery and they could play up that as the punchline there. But I think that would be a fun little fusion, because this franchise is, based on urban legends and stuff like that. But thinking on it, there is another one that I would like to see pulled off if they're able to do it. And that is the kidney heist urban legend. I don't know if Scary Stories Tell in the Dark ever did something similar, but there is an urban legend out there about like a train ride gone wrong. A gentleman's on the train, and there's a woman that kind of schmoozes him, and gets him to, like, I guess, fall in feelings with her. So they go back to her room, and he possibly slipped a drug, or maybe he falls asleep due to exhaustion. And when he wakes up in an ice bath, and his kidney is missing. And there's a note next to the bathtub saying, "Call 911 or you're gonna die." Right? But nobody knows from that point, like, what happens to the guy's kidney. Obviously, it's implied that it was stolen to be sold in the black market. But what if you put the Scary Stories twist on it, and maybe she's stealing the kidney to make a Frankenstein monster or some sort of creature out of your body part? And maybe it needs more of you or wants more of you. I don't know. You can play it up or something like that. You can make a fun little creature out of it. And I'm sure they can scrounge together a design, inspired by Gamel's artwork. I always thought that would be kind of fun to see. It was fun to see the Jangly Man artwork, how they conceptualized that. I can just imagine some like stitched up, grotesque looking creature with some mutated eyes, patchwork skin going on. That'd be freaky to see. But yeah, those are the two I would do.
I just actually, I don't know if I'm trying to find this book, the story, but I just had an idea for the design you could go off of.
And no thanks. That's the one I brought up yesterday. That's the sales.
I think this design could be kind of cool to see in that story you described.
Where is that one from?
The third book.
Third book? What story is it?
Called
No Thanks.
It's about a guy who basically, I think, leaves the store and he meets this shady looking guy who looks like that, who's trying to sell him a knife. And it's like a comedic story. He's like, "No, I don't want the knife." And he's like, "It's a sharp knife, can cut many things." So it's almost underlying tones that he's going to use it to stab him and then eventually manages to get past the salesman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe they can incorporate that into it. Maybe the No Thanks guy is trying to make more of himself. Or maybe he needs to add something to himself. And that's why he has the knife. And he cuts out the guy's kidney.
You could also make a thing where it's like, you brought up that hitchhiking thing. It almost reminds me of Creepshow, where Creepshow had the hitchhiker story with that super messed up looking hitchhiker. You could use that guy as like a rotted, messed up looking hitchhiker that, maybe it's an undead hitchhiker, a zombie one that ends up in somebody's car. Maybe they're hallucinating or something, and then the real form is revealed. So you could do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the punchline to the traditional vanishing hitchhiker urban legend is that an unsuspecting person picks up a woman, or often than not, maybe some pale looking lady. She asks for a ride home, gives her address. He takes her to the house. But when he gets there and goes to let her out, she vanishes. So he goes to knocks on the door, and her parents open the door, and he sees a picture of the woman that he gave a ride home to. And when he goes inside, the parents say, "Oh, that's our daughter, but she died years ago." So it hits him like, "Oh crap! I just gave a ride home to a ghost." That element, that's the idea, like the shock and the punchline, like discovering that they're dead. I think that would be like the fun part of the story. Like at first you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is just some unsuspecting person," but in reality they're hard and they're supernatural and they're probably not in good intentions. But yeah, um, I've read a lot of urban legends in my time. Like I said, if y'all don't have this book, Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid, go pick this up. You can clearly see pretty much all of the stories that inspired Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and In a Dark, Dark Room, whatever it's called, are in this book. Very heavy on American urban legends, but there's also some folklore in there from Europe and I think some Japan mixed in there too. So yeah, y'all need to check that out. Is there anything else we want to add before we close off?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning into this extra long special review slash traditional Goosejunkies podcast where we talked about scary stories to tell in the dark. For next episode, for episode 36, we decided that we're going to do traditional Goosejunkies podcast stuff, and we're going to go back to basics here, and we're actually going to be looking at airplane horror. So your mind's like, okay, what are they going to do with this? Well, we got two heavy hitting shows here. We're going to be comparing Goosebumps to Haunting Hour, and we're going to be facing off more Monster Blood, which was an exclusive episode in the TV show from the 90s for Goosebumps, against Flight from the Haunting Hour. Two very different takes on flight horror, but it's going to be an interesting one nonetheless. Until next time, if you haven't subscribed to the Ultimate Goosebumps Man or the Horrorlander, please do so. I'm going to drop a link to their channels down in the description and in the comment section down on this video. Unfortunately, Spongy444, he's no longer, I guess, affiliated with the podcast, but you might see him drop, I guess, comments on the videos. You still want to support him, I'll put some links for his stuff down there as well. And if you don't, maybe might be the first time you've watched us before. We do have a playlist here on YouTube where you can catch all previous Goosejunkies episodes at your own leisure. We cover basically everything here, kids horror, and I mean everything. We're willing to try it. So, if you're a fan of kids horror, feel free to support us. And the easiest way to do that is to drop a like, maybe share the video. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel here at Goosebumps Completionist, so you get up to date on all Goosejunkies podcast drops. Until next time, we hope you take care and let us know, in your opinion, what do you like more? Do you like the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark movie? Do you like the books? Do you like them both equally? What's your favorite adaptation in the film? Whatever thing you want to share with us, please do so. Until next time, take care. Have a wonderful night, y'all.
Deuces.